everybody. Episode 52 of the Better Human Podcast. Welcome back. I had something else planned for this week, but we'll push that back because something else is a little more salient in my mind. And as we start to enter election season, I think it's important. So let's do the show.
Welcome to Better Humanhood, where we build a better world by building better people. We have to live on the planet, and we have to live with other people. We have conversations about making that a wonderful proposition.
If you're not listening to Eric Weinstein, I'm going to do that a couple of times. Eric Weinstein's excellent podcast, The Portal You Should Be. He really has figured out what he's going to do with it. And he introduced a concept these last couple of episodes that I think is really intriguing. He calls it DISC, as an acronym, DISC, Distributed Information Suppression Complex. Complex as in like military-industrial complex, not complex as in a disorder or something's in your mind. I was thinking about this in terms of journalism specifically because that's my background, and I'm a bit of a journalistic idealist. Yes, that's a good way to put it. I got my start in community news at a newspaper called The Reminder in East Longmeadow, Massachusetts, and I went to work for the Chicopee Herald, and that whole family of papers, which has dwindled and now been sold to the Daily in Springfield, Mass. My boss there, Mike Dobbs, and who is also my advisor, my first advisor on my college paper at Western New England. He's still there. I got my start there, and a lot of times, if I did some feature reporting, Mike did some feature reporting, we'd see it in the Daily, a week and a half later. I really think we were doing great work. This is late 90s, early 2000s, back before, we had a bit of a shovelware website eventually, but, it was before everybody was really getting on the web and doing things there. And in today's world, it seems strange to say, but remember the first iPhone came out in 2007. Really, it was an iPod that could make phone calls. So nobody was on the web in their pocket in those days, and a lot of households were still on dial-up. So that's my background. And then Weinstein introduced this concept in a solo episode, and then he talked about it further with his brother Bret Weinstein, who's got a crazy story. You should go look that up if you don't know about it. He was a professor at Evergreen State who was accused of being a racist, and at one point he was like hiding from students who were looking in cars. They were carrying baseball bats around looking in cars for him. And basically his crime was the college had this tradition where one day out of a semester, out of a school year, the Black Student Union would have African American students stay home from school, and not just students, but faculty as well, so that the university could see what it would be like without their contribution. And one year they changed the rules. They said, we think that all the white people should stay home this year. And Weinstein, this is Bret Weinstein. I told you I was going to mess up those names. This is a different family from Harvey. So Bret Weinstein reacted badly. He said, look, if you choose to opt out, you can choose to opt out. You can't choose to opt me out. His background, as is mine, as a Jew, we know what it feels like when when you tell Jews they can't be included in something, when you tell anybody they can't be included in something, really. So choose to opt yourself out, but don't opt anybody out against their will. And so he got accused of being racist for not being willing to be opted out. And madness ensued. But anyway, that side story. So Eric Weinstein's distributed information suppression complex, he's looking at it, kind of in terms of what MSNBC's done with the Andrew Yang campaign this year, what the DNC did with the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2016, and most media just passing over the Evergreen State story with his brother in terms of a lot of his own work not getting published. And I was like, okay, there's something to this a little bit. Like, we all know about blacklists, right? And I'm recording this the overnight of early morning of Monday the 20th, Tuesday the 21st of January 2020. It'll come out in a couple of days. But there was a pro Second Amendment rally in Richmond, Virginia on Monday, this afternoon. And the media build up to this is going to be like Charlottesville in 2017, where Heather Heyer got run over by a white supremacist, where that just turned into more of a white supremacist rally. They were worried about this one. There were some groups that have been labeled white supremacists there, at least some people who belong to groups that have been labeled white supremacist. There was not a counter-protest like there was in Charlottesville. And some people who had hoped to lobby the legislature that day actually went in a day or two before and slept in legislators' offices at their invitation, of course. They weren't trespassing. But everything turned out fine. It was totally fine. They stepped out of a lot of people didn't go into the zone that was set aside for the rally because you couldn't carry a weapon in there. So people just, open carried weapons outside that area, and everything was fine. And the media really wanted this to be something. And like I said up top, I'm a bit of a media idealist, but I'm seeing again where we're messing up, and I don't love it. And it's hard to work from either the inside or the outside with it, because if you don't get your information from major media outlets, you're gonna get mixed information. Like, you're more likely to get good information from the New York Times, from NBC, from long-time traditional organizations. You might get decent information from newer organizations like Vox. You might get, and your local daily paper that's been around for 100, 150 years, probably going to be decent information. Consider the source, but we seem to be faltering here and there. Now, when I say I'm a media idealist, after I got my start in journalism, I went to grad school, and throughout the few years I was at the Weekly and the first year or so that I was in grad school, I watched bigger corporations buy up newspapers, just pulling them in one by one. I saw big layoffs. I saw some newspapers shuttered. Some went down to a couple, to 4 or 5 days a week. Eventually went down to 3, some of them. And so my thesis work, I hypothesized that once one of these major corporations buys up your paper, they're going to give less import to local news. Like, you're not going to see it on the front page. So what I did was I went down to the Library of Congress, and I sat with microfilm, and I printed out pages, and I measured front pages of 60 papers across the country. I picked like 14 random days. They were, distributed across, 2 Saturdays, 2 Sundays, 2 Mondays, 2 Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays. And I made sure I skipped major events. Like I didn't use September 12th, 2001 as one of my days because we knew that most front pages were going to be dedicated to 9/11. We also knew that, for instance, that would count as local news to New York City papers and North New Jersey papers, but not to Washington Post or the Chicago Tribune, which also ran big splashes on it. As did the local papers in Syracuse, New York, where I was living, and in Springfield, Massachusetts, where I grew up. Syracuse, New York is where I went to grad school. I hadn't been living there yet on 9/11, but you get what I'm talking about. So we skipped those days that we knew there was going to be a major event. We didn't take the paper from the day after elections. In a presidential year, I think we did wind up with one Wednesday on an off year. You'll get congressional elections, but you also get local elections. So you see who dedicates space to mayor's races and that kind of thing. Well, anyway, what I found was, it doesn't matter who your owner is. Some papers emphasize local news and some don't. And there's really, at least ownership doesn't have any bearing on that. We might see, particularly with syndicated TV and radio news, if you've seen any of the Sinclair things where they've run like the same editorial on 30 or 50 stations. They got a talking head saying the same thing in every market, and people will set those videos up and line them up. I'll see if I can find one of those for the show notes here. But I want you to pay attention, particularly as we head, straight into election season here, what you're seeing, what you're not seeing. I know it's hard to pay attention to something you're not seeing. If you read between the lines enough, you'll see it. Like if you're listening to this, probably smart enough. Not probably. If you're listening to this, you've got at least you've got a decent head on your shoulders to figure stuff out. So, what to do? Ask questions. Ask them of not only your local media institutions if you have access to them. Ask them of your elected officials because you do have access to them. Sometimes it's harder than others to get through. Sometimes it's harder than others to get a response. Ask questions anytime you see discrepancy in what you think should be and what is, because chances are, if you've grown into adulthood and you expect to see something, it probably should be there. Now, I don't know how big a blacklist could be for there to be a full distributed information suppression complex, the way that there's a military-industrial complex. There are lots of companies making a lot of money making things for our military. And as the largest weapons manufacturer, as I've heard Duncan Trussell say, if you make umbrellas, you need it to rain. We need there to be war. We're the largest weapons exporter in the world. So that's just going to keep going. But is there a machine that big that includes your Raytheons and your Boeings and that kind of thing, those kind of companies? Is there a machine that big that could unilaterally suppress information without the wider world knowing? It's really hard for more than 2 people to keep a secret. So, I don't know. You figure it out for yourself. I hope that this at least got some wheels churning for you. Hopefully it didn't make you too paranoid. I'm sitting in here at midnight on a cold southern night, feeling a little bit like Christian Slater and Pump Up the Volume. But we will see you next time. Be who you will to be.
Thank you for listening. Get show notes and more at betterhumanhood.com. Leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And have yourself a wonderful day.